Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, disappointing horror, unexpected delights and wonderful trash. It's my weekly wrap-up / January wrap-up. So yes, lots of stuff getting wrapped up. So because the end of January has fallen near the weekend, I'm doing my January wrap-up. So talking about all the books I've read in January, and I will rank those from least enjoyed to most enjoyed. And then I'll also do the kind of normal weekly wrap-up type stuff as well. I've also got a mini book haul, a two book book haul to go through with you at the end. And also wanted to start by trailing the fact that this is August 1.5 weekend, the wasted weekend. So this video is going to go up at 5 p.m. GMT on Saturday, which is like 9 o'clock in the morning if you're on the west coast of the US. So the Garb August weekend will be just starting for you. So yeah, if people aren't aware, and I'm sure you are, this is a weekend devoted to reading trashy books. I will be doing reading sprints on both days. So if you're watching this as soon as it goes up at 5 o'clock on Saturday, there's probably a reading sprint going on right now. So I'm doing one starting 4 p.m. Saturday and then one 8 a.m. Sunday. So that's GMT, my local time, the time in the UK. Obviously the time will be different depending on where you are in the world, and that's the reason why I'm doing the 4 o'clock one on the Saturday. Gives a reasonable coverage for people in the US. So it's always a bit difficult, particularly if you're in the UK, to find time, times to do these things that suit everybody. But 4 p.m. UK time is like 8 a.m. between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. if you're in the US. So hopefully not too early. But that did mean that my viewers in Australia were completely left out because it's the middle of the night for them in Australia. So I'm also doing the one at 8 a.m. on Sunday, which will be the middle of the night for people in the States, but early morning clearly for people in the UK and mid-afternoon for people in Australia. So hopefully I've given a bit of coverage for everybody. If you don't know what a reading sprint is, you just tune in and we'll have a bit of a chat. You can kind of leave comments and I will respond to them in real time. And then we will do little mini reading sprints of about half an hour. Probably do a couple of those where you just we just sit and read. So yeah, had some time for us to read trash together. Anyway, I'll stop babbling and get on with the video. So let's talk about January then. So I read 18 books in January. I think my TBR video, I had 20 books on, but I actually managed to get 2 of those read, and I can't remember now which ones they were. I managed to get 2 of those read at the end of December. So I ended up with 18 books to read in January, and I just managed it. Some people would argue I didn't manage it. So the final book that I finished was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I actually read the last 2 stories, so it's a short story collection. I actually read the last 2 stories on the morning of the 1st of February. So arguably I didn't quite do it, but depending on where you are in the world, I did. So if you're on the west coast of the US, as previously mentioned, then actually I did read those in January. So there's a bit of I think that's skirting the rules a little bit, but anyway, I'm going to count them. So yeah, so 18 books read in January, which in terms of my kind of ongoing totals on things means I've now read 61 books of the 100 books I need to read for my Read What You Own challenge, where I'm reading 100 books I already own before buying any new ones, and I've read 7 of the books I want to read before I turn 50. So I'm reading a list of 50 books that I'm reading before I turn 50. I've now read 7 of those. So let me talk through the books I read, and as always I will do this in order of least favourite to most favourite. So I've got a stack here of the paper books with post-it notes in between them for the Kindle books. So my least favourite book, and there is a theme. I'll be interested to see if anybody can figure out what the theme is. There are a number of books I have read this month, and we'll talk about this month, which have a connection. And they have a connection because I will be making a video soon. It'll be going up in February. That that talks about this connection. So see in the comments if you can figure out what that connection is. Okay, so my least favourite book of the month then was this one, Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak, which is a horror / thriller about a young woman who's hired to work as a nanny for a family who have a young son who is has an imaginary friend who may or may not be a ghost. So it was definitely very readable. It kept me turning the pages. I read it in a day or so, but there were just it just felt a bit manipulative, and I really didn't like the ending. I really didn't like the kind of denouement at the end and how everything came out and the reasons for why things have been happening. It just felt a bit exploitative to me, to be honest with you. So I was not a fan of that book. Next then we have 4 books in the Odd Thomas series by Dean Koontz. So I've now read over the last couple of months, I've read all 7 of the books in the Odd Thomas series. So the 4 I read this month, and I feel I'm questioning myself now because I feel like I read 5. Hold that thought. Okay, I just checked and it was indeed just 4. It just felt like it was 5 because they're so bad. So the Odd Thomas series is a series of books about this guy called Odd Thomas. That's his real name. Dean Koontz explains in every book why he's called Odd Thomas. It's very annoying. He is a character who is he's a fry. He's like a mild-mannered fry cook, but he can also see dead people. And he gets involved in all sorts of kind of adventures that are kind of slightly supernatural in nature. And the actual stories are kind of okay. There's an enjoyable pulpy crapness to them that's quite entertaining. But there's so much about these books that I didn't like, and it really comes down to 2 things. So the first one is Odd Thomas, who is the narrator of the books as well as the main character, constantly gives you his opinion on things in kind of quite a snidey way. I just didn't like that at all. And then also Dean Koontz just uses so many words, so many adjectives in particular. There's a real kind of overdone purple prose vibe to this book that just really got to me. So yes, I did not enjoy those. Anyway, the 4 books I read in January were Deeply Odd, Odd Hours, Odd Apocalypse, and Saint Odd. So I'm very glad to have finished that series and not need to read them anymore. Moving on then, so there's a couple of books by Stephen King in this list. So Stephen King, is one of my favourite authors, I would say, and I would say that looking over the course of my reading life. So over the course of my reading life, since I read my first Stephen King book when I was about 12, I think, Stephen King has, consistently been one of my favourite authors. The 2 books I read by him this month I didn't really enjoy, and they are both more recent ones. So I read The Institute, which is about a school for gifted kids who've got various powers, telekinesis, telepathy, things like that. And about some like dodgy government folk trying to get them. So there's definitely some fun stuff in this book, but it just felt like. And somebody mentioned this in the comments, that Stephen King has said that his books are often, one of his techniques for writing is to take 2 different stories and mash them together to make a book. And it really feels like that's the case in this book. So there's one story which is about an ex-cop who's had to resign from his position as a policeman for various reasons, and is kind of just travelling around the States, and ends up working for the police force, but kind of not as a deputy in this small town. And that story I actually quite liked. But then the story about the gifted children, and then the one child in particular who gets the focus of the story, just didn't pull me in at all. I didn't connect with any of the characters. I think Stephen King is much better at writing middle-aged men than he is at writing kids, which is probably because he's a middle-aged man. In fact, he's not even a middle-aged man anymore, is he? Bless him. So yeah, I really didn't enjoy this very much. So I also read another horror book, The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, which I had really high hopes for, and it was fine. It was enjoyable enough. It moves at a decent pace. So it's a zombie novel where the main character is a zombie, which is quite interesting. But it felt like it felt like there's a really good, really excellent short story in here. And indeed, I think somebody said in the comments that there is a short story that relates to this. So yeah, there's a great short story in here, but it felt quite padded as a novel. But it is entertaining. It's got quite a kind of YA vibe to it in terms of the amount of, there's a lot of action, but none of it's too gory. So it was quite entertaining, but not quite as good as I expected it to be. Okay, next then we have Life, the Universe and Everything by Douglas Adams. So this is a book that we're reading for my birth year book club, which has just been revitalised. So the birth year book club for February, we're actually going to be reading 2 books. So we're continuing with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Adams, and reading So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. But we're also going to be reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So if you are interested in discussing either of those books, there's a link in the description for this for my Discord, which is like an app or website where you can, we just get together and chat, basically. We talk about books and stuff. So feel free to join the Discord and chat with us about about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books and The Haunting of Hill House. Anyway, so the January pick was Life, the Universe and Everything, which was fun. I mean, it's not as good, and it doesn't feel as fresh as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in particular, which I think just felt like something different, something new, and the way Adams blends sci-fi and humour in that book, I think, is something quite special. Life, the Universe and Everything feels like he's just, he's continuing. He's continuing to write these books because they're making him money, basically. So it didn't have that freshness. The plot is a bit all over the place and didn't really hang together. But it is very, very funny. I thought this was the funniest of the books so far in the series. There's a couple of scenes, in particular this section where 2 of the characters appear in the middle of a cricket pitch during a cricket game, which is just hilarious, just very, very funny. Okay, moving on then. The other Stephen King book I read was Doctor Sleep. So this is the sequel to The Shining, which is my favourite Stephen King book. Much like The Girl with All the Gifts, not The Girl with All the Gifts, The Institute, this was quite disappointing. So I think there's some really interesting stuff in here, and again he's mashed 2 stories together. So you get the story of Danny Torrance, who's the kid in The Shining, who's now an adult, who is struggling with alcoholism and addiction, like his father did, and indeed like King did. So you get the story of his struggles, which is actually quite interesting and quite well done, and quite moving at times. So I thought that was well done. But then you also get what is effectively the part that's really the sequel to The Shining is. So if you remember, in The Shining, you've got Danny Torrance, who's the little kid, and you've got Mike Halloran, who's the kind of caretaker. I can't remember he's a chef, isn't he? He's like the hotel chef, and they've both got The Shining, and The Shining is this like psychic ability. And what I don't think is really explored particularly in The Shining is the fact, well, if these 2 people have got it and they've happened to meet, there must be loads of other people with it as well, statistically. And that really is what Doctor Sleep is about, the fact that there are other people with The Shining. In particular, it focuses on a young girl and Danny's kind of relationship with her and almost like mentoring of her. But then you also get some bad people with The Shining. So it feels almost like, if you can imagine like a Netflix sequel to The Shining, that's what Doctor Sleep feels like. If they'd hired some people who weren't Stephen King to write a sequel to The Shining, I think they might have come up with Doctor Sleep. So it doesn't have that spark and that kind of originality and passion that makes Stephen King's best books really work. Okay, moving on then. So next we have a book I really, really expected to like, and that is In a Lonely Place by Dorothy B. Hughes. So I really thought I was going to like this book. It's a classic noir. Lots of people had said in the comments when I said I was going to be reading it that they thought I'd really like it, and it's ranked pretty high in my list for the month. But I didn't love it. I didn't like it as much as I expected to. So it's about two guys, one of whom's a cop, one of whom's an ex-cop and is now a writer and is writing a crime novel, who are, you know, kind of buddies who meet up again, and what they are kind of jointly investigating this serial killer, basically. So it's very dark for a book of its time, and, you know, definitely quite gripping, and the characters are interesting, but it just didn't grab me somehow, and I can't figure out why. I think I'm going to do a video where I kind of ruminate on books that I expected to like that don't grab me, and why that is, why that might be. So yes, slightly disappointing. Just above that, we have Gone to See the Riverman, or is it Gone to See the Riverman or Go to See the Riverman? I think it's Gone to See the Riverman. I'm questioning myself now. Gone to See the Riverman. I'm going to stick with that answer. By Christopher Triana, which is a book I read for my Disturbing Books project. So this is one a lot of people have mentioned. This is a book that kind of blew up on social media a couple of years ago. I think it came out in 2020, and it was one of those books that everyone was talking about for a while. So I have done a review of this, which you can watch on the channel. And it was good. It was good. It wasn't that disturbing, but it was good. I enjoyed it. It's a kind of horror thriller about a woman who is having a kind of long distance correspondence relationship with a serial killer who's in prison, and he asks her to go to like an old shack of his to get something and take it to this mysterious character called the Riverman. So there's some stuff in here that's definitely disturbing in terms of the woman's backstory, and just I find it fascinating, the idea of, you know, these kind of relationships that grow up between people who are incarcerated for horrible crimes and people in the outside world. So there's definitely some interesting stuff in here, and it's really gripping. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but yeah, watch my full review if you want to know more about it. Another one then that I read for the Disturbing Books project was The Room by Hubert Selby Jr. Again, I've done a review of this on the channel. So this is a really interesting book about a guy who's in prison for a terrible crime, and about like the trial and his backstory, you know, his childhood and things like that, but told in quite an experimental way. So it kind of flips about all over the place. Some of the writing is very kind of stream of consciousness, so you kind of just have to absorb it almost. So yeah, a really interesting book, definitely quite disturbing. Some horrific scenes of animal cruelty in this book. But yeah, I enjoy is the wrong word, but I thought it was a good book, and definitely want to read some more by Selby Jr. Okay, moving on then. So I mentioned it at the start, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So the first Sherlock Holmes short story collection. So I'm reading through all of the Sherlock Holmes books as part of this classics project I'm doing, where I'm reading classic books that were recommended by Michael K. Vaughan on his channel. So I didn't love all of the stories in this collection, but a lot of them I really, really liked. So they are classic, you know, what you think of as classic Holmes. You know, they're quite short, they're all about 30 pages, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, you know, gives you a tangible mystery, and then you know, logically solves it through Holmes's deduction. The relationship between Holmes and Watson is always fun to read. So I definitely like this collection more than the two kind of short novels or novellas that precede it in the Holmes series. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Just above that then, another book I've reviewed on the channel, Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. So just an excellent crime thriller about two strangers who meet on a train and decide to trade murders. And one of them is much more into this idea than the other one, shall we say. And it becomes a kind of really tense, kind of stalkerish story. So yeah, really well written, a perfect length. Really, so the character of Bruno, who's kind of like the bad character, is fantastically written and really interesting character study. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I don't know if anyone's been paying attention, and I don't know if anyone is wondering where one particular book I read this month features in this list. So that book is Hog by Samuel R. Delany, and that is the next book I'm going to talk about. So that ended up being, on reflection, my fourth favourite book of the month. Now, I did a long review of this, I think probably my longest review I've ever done. It's a really difficult and troubling book, and when I finished reading it, I didn't really know what I thought of it. And that review is kind of me trying to figure out what I thought of it. But even at the end of the review, I still didn't really know what I thought of it. But a couple of weeks have passed, and it's a book that hasn't left hasn't left my mind in that time. And for that reason, I've ranked it quite high in this list. I really did think it was a horrific book, but a very interesting book. So I won't talk any more about it because I've done a long review of it. But yeah, that's where it's ended up in my list. Okay, 3 more books to talk about then. So the next one is another one by Patricia Highsmith. This is Carol, which was originally published under a pseudonym and under a different title, The Price of Salt. So this is Highsmith's second novel. So I'm reading all of Highsmith's books in a project this year with Anne Novella, who's got a fantastic channel, which you should check out. So this is very different from Strangers on a Train in that it's not a crime novel as such, although there are elements of that in it. So a novel about a lesbian relationship between a kind of 30-ish-year-old woman and a 20-ish-year-old woman. So just a lovely romance, basically. A really well-written, convincing romance, more than anything else. I thought it was a really fantastic book. Ahead of that, and again, I did do a review of this on the channel, I thought this was going to end up being my #1 book of the month, but another book just pipped it. That's Bomber by Len Deighton, which is a fantastically detailed and interesting account of kind of a 24-hour period during the Second World War, particularly revolving around a bombing raid by the RAF on Germany. Yeah, wonderfully detailed, a huge cast of characters who are all really well written. It just really comes together as a fascinating and gripping read. So the book that just beat that, and only just, it might even be joint first, was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which again I've done a review of, a sci-fi book, but very much a book about relationships and humanity, rather than sciencey stuff. I thought it was just a lovely, lovely book, a really life-affirming, interesting, charming book, which, you know, given all the horrible stuff I've been reading recently, was definitely something I needed. So yeah, I thought it was wonderful, and I can't wait to read the next book in the series. Okay, so that's the January stuff out of the way. In terms of February then, so I've finished 1 book so far in February, which was Geek Love by Catherine Dunn, which, like In a Lonely Place, was not as enjoyable for me personally as I expected it to be. So it's a very, very strange book about a family of circus freaks, basically, where the parents deliberately, so the mother deliberately takes strange drugs and things like that in order to try and have children who are kind of deformed in some way, in order to then use them in a freak show. So it sounds horrifically disturbing. It's not horrifically disturbing. I would say it's mildly disturbing, but I didn't think it was as disturbing as the subject matter would make you think it might be. It's one of those books that I think was very popular when it came out, which I think was in the late 80s. It's a book that a lot of people really love. I suspect that if I'd read it when it came out, which would have been when I was about 16 or 17, I think if I'd read it then, I would have thought it was amazing. But it felt a bit dated to me, and yeah, it just didn't grip me in the way I expected it to. So I finished that. I've started last night The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, which I'm loving so far. It's just fantastic. You probably know the story because it's a very well-known story, and I'm pretty sure I'll do a full review of it, but I'm really, really enjoying it. But I have paused it because obviously now is Garb August. So I'm now reading the second Kafka novel, Kafka, God of Death by Barry Sadler, which I'm about a third of the way through, which is fantastic. And then this weekend I will also be reading Kansas City Cop and Endless Night by Richard Lehman. So looking forward to both of these. And then after the weekend's over and I've finished my trashy stuff, I will go back to the Midwich Cuckoos. In terms of channel stuff then, so obviously this is Garb August weekend, and that has dominated my thinking about the channel. So I haven't really got much planned yet for the week ahead. I'm halfway through filming a Kindle unboxing and kind of first impressions video about the new, or the 2022 model of like the basic Kindle. So that will probably go up on Monday. I've got a very special video I'm planning for tomorrow. So as well as doing the lives, doing like the live reading sprints, I'll also be doing a kind of closing ceremony for Go Up August, which will go up in my normal slot on a Sunday afternoon. So I've got there's something I've sorted out for the end of that, which I'm very pleased with. So yeah, looking forward to that. But then beyond that, I'm not really sure. I need to find a tag video to do. I need to find, so I need to decide which books I've read recently that I'm going to review. So we shall see. We shall see. I will come up with something, no doubt. And in the week that's just gone, what have you had? You've had a video I did on 5 different types of trashy books. You've had my review of, going completely blank. So you've had my reviews of The Room by Hubert Selby Jr., which I talked about, and Sign for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I did the Give My Regards to Broadway tag, which involves me singing horrifically. So yeah, if you value your hearing, don't watch that video. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that's been up in the last week or so. Right, I promised you at the start a mini book haul. It's actually twice as big as I thought it was going to be. I said it was 2 books. I'd forgotten it's actually 4 books. So I have a couple of things that have been very kindly sent to me by viewers, and a couple of things which were a belated Christmas present. So for various reasons at Christmas we weren't able to see my parents. We saw them last weekend, and I have a couple of books as a result. So Aliens Vasquez by V. Castro, which I'm really looking forward to reading. Love the Aliens franchise, love Vasquez's character, love V. Castro's books. So it feels like it's going to be a hit to me. And also another new Stephen King book. So given what I've just been saying about Stephen King's recent output, we'll see what I make of this. But they also got me Fairy Tale, which I'm looking forward to trying. I did quite like his kind of fantasy-ish books. So like The Talisman I enjoyed, and Eyes of the Dragon wasn't too bad. So we'll see what I make of this. It does feel like it might be longer than it needs to be, but hey, it's Stephen King. And then I've also been sent this, what's it called? Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo, which was sent to me by viewer Lel Alet. So thank you very much for this, Lel. I really appreciate this. This is a book I had on kind of my longer list to read for my Disturbing Books project, but I hadn't managed to pick up a copy of. So we'll definitely be reading that soon. And then completely unexpectedly, Troy Tradup, who's a long-time viewer of the channel and more recently a booktuber. So he's the person who created the Give My Regards to Broadway tag that I did this week. And he's also an author. So he wrote a book called The Forgotten Boy, which is excellent. Knowing that I'm into watches, and if you've seen my shorts I've started putting up again, those tend to be watch themed. Troy sent me this lovely book called Horology, which is all about different watches, and it's beautiful. It's fantastically detailed. So you've got loads of really interesting information in here, but also some lovely illustrations of beautiful watches, which I can't possibly afford. So I can't decide if it's a blessing or a curse, this book. But look at those, look at the pictures, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So yeah, really looking forward to kind of, it's not a book I will read cover to cover in one go, but a book I will dip into every so often and tease myself with watches I can't afford. So thank you again very much, Troy. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. So today's book, again, was chosen by one of my patrons. So the top 2 tiers of my Patreon, people can pick books from the shelves for me to talk about. Today's book was picked by Michaela Girard. So thank you, Michaela. The book is The Tokyo Zodiac Murders by Soji Shimada. So this is a fantastic Japanese crime novel from, I think, I'm going to say it came out in the 70s. I know, 1981. But only published in English in 2004. It's a kind of locked room murder mystery with an incredible amount of detail about the locked room and things like that, but also a fantastically grim and disturbing kind of serial killer story with a really weird denouement that is incredibly horrific. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I do need to read some more books by this guy, because this was excellent. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you read any of the books I talked about. Let me know what your favourite read was in January. Hopefully you're taking part in Go Up August. I may even see you at one of my reading sprints. But until then, I will say thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.